grab your coffee, grab your weed, grab whatever you need. Okay? All right, y'all. This week, Jupiter is really in charge as the planet of luck and expansion is bringing abundance to our dreams and our wombs, as he is the apex of both a grand water trine and a T square. We're going to get into what that means this week. So, can we get real about our desires and our wombs as a way to make space for our dreams to actually come true? So, how do we work with the planet of expansion and abundance in a time of chaos and rapid change? So, this is the weekly forecast for October 26th to November 1st, what I am calling Mercury moving to Sagittarius. So, what and who do we believe in? So, welcome back to Yapping with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, with a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. I am your host and guide, Nicole Rouse, a storyteller who comes from a line of storytellers who tell stories in many different ways. And here I work with astrology and ethnography to explore the stories of what it means for us to be human. Because right now the president's up for grabs. So, who is leading the stories that will bring us into our futures? Now, every Sunday we check into the chaos we call society and ask two main questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, or reflect upon? Now, the intro might have been a little confusing because I talked about Jupiter, but I'm naming this about Mercury because Mercury, the planet of communication, the fastest moving planet, the planet that sits at the crossroads and delivers the offerings that we lay down to other locations, is moving signs from Scorpio over to Sagittarius. And Mercury is going to be loud, as Mercury always is. But right now, this week, alongside these kind of transit movings from one sign to another, a lot of things are hitting Jupiter. And so when we're talking about Jupiter, y'all, we're talking about beliefs. We're talking about belief systems. We're talking about the kind of structures of society that create our kind of foundational basis of believing and beliefs of said structures and the kind of focus around why we believe to begin with. So this is why Jupiter rules professions like law, like teaching, and also spirituality, spiritual leaders, spiritual gurus. Because in astrology, the ninth house is where Jupiter likes to be. In modern astrology, in ancient astrology, it was more the 11th house. But regardless, it's above the horizon. And so with Jupiter being in the sign of Cancer right now, Cancer being the sign that tends to sit below the horizon, the thing that is in modern astrology, the fourth house, in ancient astrology, the third house where the moon finds her joy. Now that Jupiter is expanding the things that sit below the surface, but are foundational for us as a society, as Jupiter is leading this conversation between the kind of water trine that it is in, that I'll get into in a little bit, between Mars and Saturn, that is being supported by Mercury and Neptune, but also going to be starting this T square between Venus and Chiron later this week. What's happening is that we are having an expansion, an abundance, a kind of big flashing light that Jupiter is asking us to examine around our relationship to Cancerian themes, as I've been talking about. So this is family, this is home, this is memory, this is storytelling. These are the kind of things that we lay at the foundations of society that allows us to grow. It is expanding those things for us because that is the location that we can use in order to break these structures and remake them to our will. But do we know what our will is? Do we know what our belief systems lie? What are the kinds of laws and structures and philosophies and cosmologies that we really need to resurrect, to create, recreate right now, as we are being forced to face the reality of the structures that we are currently in, that don't provide care, but act as if it is caring? So then who do we believe and why? And so this is where Mercury comes in, Mercury coming out of Scorpio into Sag, the sign that Jupiter also rules. We are going to have to confront our own belief systems, who and what we believe and why, especially as Mercury is going to eventually retrograde in Sagittarius, going back into Scorpio before it makes its way back into Sag again. This is going to be a review of our belief systems. It's going to be a review of the depths of our knowing and the locations that we go to when we are confronted with some harsh truths. Uranus opposing Mercury. And so in this time, this week, right, this is really about dreams. This is really about how do we work with the dreamscape? How do we work with the ability to sit in the sacred and bring that into the mundane so that we can figure out how to navigate what is going to be a very tense winter. So let's get into it, y'all. But before I get into that, I want to kind of do some check-ins real quick about some things that I am offering. So if you've been with me, I've been talking a lot about my queering chaos conversations, and I just had my first one. I'm going to get into a reflection of that in a second. But I'm having my next one actually in Chicago, November 18th. And that's going to be talking about how do we queer family and community. And that's really timely, especially with the transits going on right now and this focus on Cancer for various ways. And so when we're talking about queering conversations, y'all, the purpose of it is to dream. When I engage with our concepts and the praxis of queering, it is for us to see outside the norm, to see outside what already is. Because if what already is, and if this is normative, does not allow us to fully express our sense of selves and humanity as a way to maintain this norm, then we got to ask ourselves, who is this norm serve and why? Am I really want to be a part of a norm that requires me to perform in certain ways? And what happens if I reclaim my sense of self, if I allow my sense of self to emerge, to come out, to play, then what actually would I want to do? Who would I be? And who would I want to be with? And so queering chaos conversations to me is a space, is a portal, is a location that folks can come and congregate and start to grapple in community with one another, with folks who are having their practice or their work or their own musings that are engaged with it. And so this conversation, I'll be bringing together Dr. Moya Bailey, professor at Northwestern, the progenitor of the concept misogynoir, and one of my good friends who also is a community gatherer, has been a community gatherer for 20 years. I'm going to bring her in conversation with Kristen Kaza, who is affectionately known in Chicago as the Party Mom, who has been one of the leaders of the queer collective Slow Mo, who is now going to be sunsetting this year. And Kristen is now moving into, as a mother herself of twins, and have formed a huge queer community of what does it mean to queer family. And that's a lot of her work going forward. So I'm bringing Moya and Kristen alongside a conversation with Roy Kingsley, who is a librarian and rapper in Chicago, born and raised, has his 11th album, Dandelions Out, is a Black queer man who is a well-known librarian who is really queering our understanding of archives, of libraries, of knowledge, and how we reach communities by bringing together the sonic landscape of rap as an archival practice, putting it alongside the ways in which we structure our knowledge, these things called libraries, and has created its own mobile library that involves music along with books and art so that we can see the fluidity and the fullness of culture as a way to bring community together. And so these are three culture workers that I'm bringing together, sit them on a table to talk with me and my co-producer, Forrest Brooks, to really ask ourselves, what does it mean not just to talk about queering chaos via family and community, but also the templates for, because all these folks are doing it. And so what does it look like for us to dream together, y'all? How do we dream together? This is really a pressing question for this week, really going forward, but it's going to get loud right now. And it's been loud since Jupiter has moved its way into Cancer at the beginning of May. And I've talked about this a while before. And I'm going to continue talking about it because we have to always remember, we have to think about the ways a transit moves into a sign as setting the tone for it. And when Jupiter moved into Cancer in May, it squared Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Neptune and Saturn in Aries, when it made its way initially into that was the very beginning of my show back in April, when I first started this iteration of my show, in which I talked about the rise of the cultural worker. And right now, as we are talking about this today, we are seeing really what this means, of why we need to understand culture as part of the work and how cultural workers right now are really important. But a cultural worker is not always for the liberation of all. A cultural worker can also be working the dominant culture so that it makes us stagnant and maintains what already is. So this is where Jupiter is really expanding this week in this kind of tension, that we have a water trine, which is supposed to be this kind of energy that gives us support. At the same time, we're having this T square. When we have a T square and a water trine together, but the apex is the same planet, it's asking us to get real with ourselves and one another about what it is we understand to be the reality we are in, alongside the possibilities that can be, and what happens when those two come together. Okay. And so for me, those two things coming together is the beginning of chaos. And so how do we queer those chaoses? How do we engage with this chaos and bring another? And I want you to ask yourselves that. You don't have to. Queerness is not just about your sexuality. It is about the ways in which you are not aligned with the status quo, the norm of a society that needs you again to conform to its will, bend to its will. Identity is a way that the state gets us to bend to its will when those identities are put into a box and narrowly constructed. And you are told and forced to put that upon yourself. And if you don't perform that script that way, right, then you are disciplined in some way, shape, or form. And this is where the concept of death comes in. I just taught this actually this past Thursday in my seminar with Bigless Conjure, death in the ancestors, working with Pluto, in which I talked about the energy of death and its different iterations. If folks are interested, you can still purchase that reading and purchase that seminar as a recording through Bigless Conjure. I'll have the information in the show notes below after the end of the show. But in that seminar, I was really talking about the energy of death and how we have to work with it. And there's different ways to work with death. And right now, we are all undergoing not just the kind of physical death, as we are seeing the impact of these kind of laws and structures and the lack of care that we have extended upon one another. And so with the rampant rise in the continuation of COVID, we never left COVID, y'all. We never left that pandemic. We just stopped recording about it. We stopped talking about it publicly, but it is still there. We are seeing physical death occur. But right now, we are all going through a social death. We are all going through a social death, and death hurts. And society, as it decays and as we are forced to face the reality of a decaying society, we're going to be forced to deal with the energy of death, of the ideas that we thought were solid no longer making sense, of the dreams that we thought we had that were ours that no longer are true because that society never really was, of the ways that we have made relationships and connections that may not honor ourselves, or we cannot honor the other person because they themselves are coming into a different sense of self, right? All of that is death knocking, letting us know that change is here. So for us to be able to work with it, we have to bring in and sit alongside death and ask ourselves then, if we need to die, if socially we are going through a decaying, a forced mirror moment in which we are seeing just how unstable a lot of these things were to begin with. So death is trying to, in a weird way, also show us love by showing us truth. If we can sit with that truth, right, then what do we create? This is where dreams come in. This is where the cultural working come in. This is where our understandings of different types of knowledges and knowings and technologies are really knocking at the door right now, because that is what's going to allow us to be able to dream, to be able to move and go and flow somewhere else. And so this is where the body comes in, y'all. This is why the body is important right now. The South Node in Virgo that's been there, since the beginning of this year, and will be there until mid to late, I want to say late July next year. With the North Node in Pisces, this is this release. This is this kind of opening up of the body, of the South Node in Virgo, having us have to face some of the kind of analytical ways that we have been critical of ourselves and one another, and the facts that we use to make a basis of our criticalness. A lot of that is being broken apart. I've talked about this a lot with the Western knowledge production and our ideas of where we get our knowledge from and facts. A lot of that is dissolving. A lot of that has been moved away. And even if the logic was there, that we are seeing how the state itself does not believe in its own knowledge systems, right? You got RFK up there talking about, vaccines are causing you sickness, right? And having these ridiculous kind of of proclamations in which he's giving some of these states the kind of audacity to move away from its own scientific leanings and saying things like vaccines are no longer mandated. I think, what was it, out in Utah? Was it Utah? I don't want to get the state wrong. If folks know here, in which they had just won this kind of landmark thing in which they were able to ban the state from making it mandatory for kids to have vaccines, right, on the vaccine kind of scheduling. And there was this all of this kind of, I saw this episode, this show, this clip I should say, of these three women who were so excited because now they had freedom, but that freedom came through the banning of these kind of ways of tracking a population for its health and care. Here we go, health and care again, and the idea of the family and children, which is all Cancerian, right? The South Node in Virgo and this North Node in Pisces is also making it very clear where people's real belief systems lie, and it's a goddamn mess. It's a goddamn mess, right? Of conspiracy theories and illogics as people are swimming in the deep waters of Pisces, but without realizing that you don't just give up everything you learn from those kind of structures and analysis and ways of knowing from the kind of foundations of your learning. This is K through 12 along with higher education, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication, right? And how we learned how to communicate. You don't just give all that up to go into the deep waters and swim in some shit you don't understand. This is about marrying the South and North Node together. But we are seeing really quickly just how much society overall belief systems are rooted in illogics that are wreaking havoc for us all. So then how do we come back into a different sense of knowing, a different sense of being, a different logic if we're living in a society that is completely making us sick and ignorant on purpose as a strategy to maintain control over us? Well, you got to turn your body on, y'all. You got to turn your body's logic on and realize that, one, you have to believe the structure you're in and realize that that is what it is doing. Two, understand that it does not actually care about you. It is about its own maintenance and reproduction. So again, do we believe our oppressor? And then three, if you do, then you realize that one of the only things that makes sense right now is for us to come embodied, be embodied, and turn that body's logic on. Okay. And so that's the next seminar that I'll be teaching. As part of my work with Big Liz Conjure, Mambo Liz Ruth, is on Monday, tomorrow, I'll be teaching Understanding Your Spiritual Gifts with Astrology. I've done this seminar before a few months ago, and so I'll be reintroducing it and focusing a lot more on how to work with astrology via the 4th, 8th, and 12th house, because the chart does give us indications of how we work with our energies, which will help us work with our knowing. This is, again, the South Node in Virgo, North Node in Pisces. Can we marry the kind of foundational cosmologies and ideologies that we've learned and bring that into an understanding of our knowing, the sacred and mundane? Can we understand that the sacred is accessed only when we can come into the mundane being the body? So the astrology chart can help us turn on the body's logic with just looking at the elements, looking at placements. You don't even have to get into and know, quote unquote, all the ins and outs of astrology. Something I was telling a client recently, y'all, and I want to tell y'all here too. The more you know, like logistics about astrology, right? The planets, the stars, the houses, aspects, being able to hear somebody else's chart and then making kind of assessments of them and then putting that in conversation with you. That is all great, but that is only step one. The next step then is to pull back and ask yourself, when you're looking at that chart, how have you been constituted? How have you been constituted? And anytime I look at a chart, an astrology chart, especially because how I examine the chart is a way for us to understand what it means to be human again. So it's the journey to self. That's why my natal reading is called Journey to Self. And all the other readings I offer are kind of offshoots of that foundation of who and what the self is and how we reclaim it. When you're looking at your chart, y'all, I want you to ask yourself questions. And one of the first questions I ask the chart is, okay, how has this person been constituted? How has the person been groomed into an understanding of the self, right? That may be antagonistic to the energies that they have come into this life with. And so that's why I start with the sun and moon, because that represents the first institution that we are constituted through, which is the family. Right? Sun being the father, moon being the mother, but the sun also being you, the essence of you, your light, your ego, your passion, your drive, and the moon being your body, your emotions, and how you work with that body and the emotions, the physicality of your existence with the kind of energy that lights up that existence together makes you. 1 plus 1 is 3 in this equation, right? Father, mother, and I'm not trying to make this into a gendered binary. I'm just using these terms, okay, y'all? Parent one, parent two brings together to make a third. So when we're looking at the chart, there's a way that we have to, or I would argue that the one of the ways we can really start to work with it and not just use it as another mechanism to box you into an identity that is rigid is to understand that more you go into the chart and understand the ways that you're constituted, because you can then see how your parents were constituted and you can get these understandings of patterns, right? This is what we call generational patterns. Once you see the pattern and understand how your pattern then interacts with society, these are the outer planets. This is why I bring the outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in. Then we see the way structure is constructed for you and your generations, because those outer planets are generational planets. So we can see how the generations are constructed in that structure and how it aligns. Then you can look at your inner planets. So besides the sun and moon, then we get into Mercury, Venus, and Mars, because that is the kind of overall essence of you and how you navigate communication, how you navigate conflict, how you understand relationships and understandings of love and strategy. Those are personal, but how those personal planets interact with the structures of society. So besides those 3 outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn also come into that. That's why I call Jupiter and Saturn the parents of the astrology. They're the most outer inner planets. And then having all that have a conversation with each other, then we can start to get to some differences of how we engage with this thing called life. And so if you're interested, I'll be doing that seminar on tomorrow. And then next month, I'll be doing a 100 astrology series with Mambo, starting with how you look at the chart without even getting to planet stars and zodiacs. If you just looked at it and you looked at the hemispheres and you looked at the elements and you looked at the groupings, can you get a first energy shot of your chart? And then from there going into, okay, then what do the planets and signs mean? Then from there are the houses, and how do you tell that story? And this is all about storytelling, y'all. Can you tell the story of your life? And if you can tell the story of your life, then you can remake that story of your life. This is about bending things to your will. This is about bending reality. But in order for you to bend reality, you have to face the reality you are in right now. And this, to me, is exactly what the energy of this week is getting into. What is the construction of the life that you want to live? Because you have finally realized the life you are living is one that is not full of life. So let's get into it, y'all. Okay. So this week has been is a really interesting one, because with the kind of planets that are with the transits going on, this is a lot about will starting today. So today we got Mars and Lilith are meeting in Scorpio. Now this Lilith cracks me up a lot when we talk about that in astrology, because the minute you bring up Lilith, then you get folks talking about the dark femme and the wild, and the wild coming out. And then I remember watching on I was watching online. I don't know if y'all seen this. I think it was on IG Reel or something, in which it was a bunch of women, white women, who were talking about getting into their wild. And I think they were promoting some kind of like dark femme retreat or something. But it was the most stereotypical things, y'all. It was like, and it was also kind of disturbing. So the first scene, I can't make this shit up, was a woman who must have just given birth. And she was saying that I'm so wild that I know that my milk is not just for me. And it was like her husband or partner, like sucking her tit, like in drinking her milk. I was like, whoa, that was a strong opening. That was a strong opening for wild women. And then the other one was someone saying that like when she gets upset, she doesn't just cry, but she twerks it out. And then I think she was twerking, but it looked like more like a back spasm. And then after that, it was somebody else saying she's so wild, she eats her meat raw, and then she literally ate meat raw. I was really confused, y'all, and also highly disturbed. But it's really indicative, right, of the way that we have been taught this idea of the wild femme. It's still through a very patriarchal masculine lens. It's still for the masculine gaze in some way, shape, or form. And so this today, but really this transit of Lilith being in Scorpio for a while, but now we got Mars here, Mercury is here. Scorpio season is loud. The sun came in last week, right? Scorpio season. If you got kids born, any kids born the past week or two, gonna have a lot of Scorpio energy, and that is intense energy. It's intense energy, y'all, right? So I want you to ask yourself how you've been feeling. Has there been these kind of strong emotions that have come up, a particular irritation, anger, or rage? It doesn't have to only be that, but it's the times, y'all, and it's the transits. And there's a way that Mars, being again in its sign, one of its signs, and I've been in one of its signs for a while, it's getting a power up, but it's getting a power up by going to the depths of the waters, the deep waters, the scorpionic waters again, that are about truth. And it's also about obsession. So what have you been obsessing over lately as well? And how do you work with that energy of obsession? As a Scorpio rising, I always say this, that if it wasn't for obsession, I wouldn't have finished my degrees. Okay. There is no goddamn way, because that shit is ghetto. Who the hell wants to sit here and take 7 to 10 years of their life to supposedly learn something in depth, to maybe be able to after that get a job that will hopefully pay your living, right? But in order to do all that, you go through a lot of emotional damage. This shit is not for that shit is kind of ghetto. So I realize, and I really do understand that my scorpionic energy, right, that kind of obsession, the need to pick a bone to get to the marrow, is something that once you work with it can really help drive you to a goal, to help drive you through bullshit, even as you understand that to get to that end goal, you will have to navigate some unsettled waters, some deep waters, some treacherous waters, some waters that may be betraying of you. Right? These are all scorpionic energies. And so today in particular, right, with Mars meeting Lilith in Scorpio, there's an intensity of this energy, an intensity of this strategizing, right, around this idea of the wild. And I did a song with Forrest called Wild, that I performed back in May. The first lyrics were, "It's time to get wild, feet on the floor, head held high, feel that sweat down your back, release it in the church of house music." I'm actually going to put that song at the end of this episode this time. But I'm bringing it up because this idea of what it means to be wild, I want you to grapple with, okay? Lilith, again, has been in Scorpio for a while, and I believe will be there for a little bit more before it makes her way into Sagittarius. And what I want you to remember is that Lilith in Scorpio is asking us to go into the depths of our own souls, our own sense of self, our own wild. The idea of wild in the context of society. Now, we live in a patriarchal society that tells us that we have to perform scripts and roles in certain ways. And if you don't, you become deviant, and then you become something that is shunned in society. Well, what does it mean to reclaim that wild back? Well, this is really about the quote unquote femme, the feminine that has her own voice, that allows herself or themselves to be able to sit in their own knowing. And so when you talk about being wild, y'all, and having to work with and strategize around that, again, the only way you can actually come into a wild that is you is if you face the reality that you are in. So this is confrontational energy, a confrontational energy so that you can figure out where your depth lies. You can figure out where your scorpion lies. You can figure out where your inability to handle bullshit really does lie. And what does that mean then, not to overwhelm you, but to actually work with it. All right. So play with that. Play with that, especially this week in this Scorpio energy, because we are in tense waters right now. We are in waters that are requiring us to get to truth, but whose truth and whose light are we trying to use to get there? And that's really important. Okay. And this is how we get to dreaming. And so I say this because tomorrow and for the rest of the week, we're having this kind of energy of Neptune going back into Pisces, because Neptune went back into Pisces last week. And at 29 degrees, it's at Pisces at 29 degrees. And so the deep waters and the Lord of the deep water are now back together again, but this time a little bit differently because Neptune dried out in Aries. Neptune got a taste of the shore, got a taste of owning its own head after being kind of waterlogged in the collective's kind of daydreams and dreamings and musings for the past 14 years. Now, Saturn is there as well. Saturn, again, ruling time, responsibility, ruling tradition, telling us and helping us understand that we have got to grow up. Like there are cycles and times that we have to review. And so, what are we growing up in? Well, collectively, we have to grow up in what we believe in. And Neptune is there as the planet that is the higher octave of Venus. And this is about, right, the deep waters. Any of the waters will involve memory, y'all, and storytelling, because memory and storytelling go hand in hand. How do we understand things in our memories? Well, memories usually come through creative ventures, one of them being stories, the other being music and the like, art and dance and pottery and all the kind of artifacts of life. Okay, this is artifacts of life. With the kind of retrograde back into the deep waters, we have to revise and review the stories that we have held onto via the belief systems and who we have allowed ourselves to be led by. So this grand water trine, right, is about beliefs, because we're going to see Mars with Lilith hanging out right there is having the trine to Saturn that has Neptune hanging out next to her. And then they both meet up at Jupiter that's hanging out by himself. Big old planet of expansion, big daddy in the sky, right? The one that loves to have a good time. Well, Jupiter ain't having such a good time necessarily, because Jupiter is having us to face the kind of ways and the stories and beliefs that we have rested our understandings of collectives upon. Right? Can we cut through the kind of bullshit that we have been fed and get into the truth of the heart of things? Mars in Scorpio is the warrior, right? It is the warrior who uses the butchering, who uses the precision to understand where to attack, where to act, where to engage with. And if we are having to be engaged with our wild, right? Mars conjunct Lilith. If we are having to engage our wild as a strategy making place, and Lilith is the untamed feminine, the one who told even Yahweh himself, this is some bullshit in that garden. What do you mean, right? That I am begot from Adam. We are all the same. And what do you mean I can't eat from the tree of knowledge? What are you trying to hide? If this is supposed to be absolute truth, but we cannot have it, we cannot engage with it, right? So there was already in the story of Lilith, in the different iterations of it, a pushback against a kind of patriarchal understanding of life, of truth, right? And who and where you find that truth from. Do you find it from somebody else? Do I have to be part of a rib from a creation that was created at the exact same time as me? What makes that other creation supposed to be over me? If we are all together and we have come out of this creation, this God at the same time, then why the hell is there a hierarchy all of a sudden? Here we go. Hierarchy is coming back into play. And so Lilith said, well, fuck all of that. You're going to call me a demon, right? So now she's known as a demon because she said no. Because she said, I wish the fuck you would, because she took back her own power and decided to create these different offspring that were considered demons. Now, this is a really interesting story at this time. If you're in the Patreon, we're reading N.K. Jemisin's Inheritance Trilogy. And in the second book, they talk about the idea of demons being constructed, right, from when gods and humans procreate, and they create these beings that have human forms, so they have morality, but they have the ability to bend reality like gods. And so because they can die, their blood becomes almost like kryptonite to gods and godlings, because the minute that that blood touches god's essence and being, that god then also dies. And so so if you're in the Patreon or if you're interested, join me there, because we're reading the last book, the Awakened Kingdoms on the trilogy, this month, and we're going to be talking about it in our salon next week, or this week actually, on Wednesday. But then next month we're going to read the novella that she wrote to finish off this trilogy, in which a godling does come down to earth, and we'll talk about identity and stuff. But the whole point of this is I'm talking about Lilith and this idea of demons, okay? And so when we're talking about this idea of who and what is a demon, and this idea of what is shunned in society, what is seen as taboo in society, because Lilith rules taboo things, but so does Scorpio. The taboo shit's coming to the light, right? The taboo things are coming to the light. And we are seeing this over and over again. But we have this trine to Saturn, again, Saturn in Pisces, and Neptune is now hanging out only about 4 degrees off. And as a generational planet, this means that this is a collective and individual kind of impact. Pisces is the collective. Saturn and Pisces, even though Saturn is not like being in that deep water, because Saturn is ruled by earth and air. So you waterlogging earth, it can sink, it can feel like mud, right? How have y'all been feeling lately? Have you felt sometimes sluggish as Saturn's gone back into Pisces, right? Is there some kind of mud that needs to be reshaped and remolded so that you have more solid foundation, so that you understand that you have to be the foundationals that's solid for you in these times of chaos? Saturn being there, right, again, is saying that as we have to face this wild and face these taboo things, it's up to us then to remake our traditions. We have to construct and create creativity. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in a conversation then in Cancer with Saturn. Jupiter being in Cancer is said to be exalted, right? Both of its signs that rule Jupiter, Pisces and Sag, are activated. Again, Pisces being activated with this North Node, but also with Saturn and Neptune moving back into it. And then later this week, when does Mercury? On the 29th, Mercury then goes into Sagittarius, meaning that the fastest moving planet is making its way into the parts of Jupiter that are about philosophy, that are about our belief systems, that are about adventure. We have to, Sagittarius energy, I always say, is that good hoe energy, because you got to kind of flow through life and experience all kinds of things, right? And turning that into wisdom. It's the wise fool. Wise fool. But you can be a wise fool only when you experience life, and then you turn and you embody that experience. You learn from it. You believe it. Belief systems again. We are talking about the things that we believe in and why. Who do we believe in and why? What are the foundations that were laid that we are using to construct those belief systems individually and collectively? And Jupiter being in Cancer means that the apex of all of these things, the taboo things, the wild in us, the strategizing around that thing, the collective beliefs and stories that we tell, the ideas of the structures that we need, who we need to lead these structures and why, are all in a conversation with the family, with care, with nurturing. Jupiter is expanding the fact that our philosophies and laws and religions and understandings of intelligence, what even knowledge is the whole purpose of it is for us to be able to construct societies and collectives that can provide the care we need. And if the care is not there, then who's responsible for providing it and why? So then we go to this T square. Because after Wednesday, when Mercury goes into Sag, I want you to remember something. Uranus is still in Gemini, retrograde at 0 degrees. So what happens when a planet's at 0 degrees and something else transiting is coming into its opposite sign? That means you're going to automatically form an opposition. So the minute Mercury goes into Sag, it's going to be opposing Uranus in Gemini, because it won't go into Taurus until next week. So it's hanging out the 0 degree, retrograding, Mercury coming in. moving forward, but it's in its pre-shadow retrograde energy. We're having to face off. We are having to face off about our beliefs and the structures that we are told are actual facts and truth. And we are really seeing just how much believing in structures that tell us truths that aren't actually showing up. What does that mean for us individually and collectively? This is about facts and truth. Whose truth do we believe and why? Because right now, the structures in society and those who we are leading it are telling us their version of truths that if we are being shown over and over again are nothing but a bunch of lies. Right? When Uranus moves back into Taurus, y'all, I said this last week, I'm going to talk about it more next week. It's coming after that full moon in Taurus. We're going to be made abundantly clear again, the materiality of what we need for our existence. Taurus is Venus rule, but it is the earth version again. It is food, it is pathways, it is the kind of comfort and care and stability and safety we say we need. Uranus and Gemini is showing us that the thoughts that we have been told about what that safety and security are have been nothing but falsehoods, right? Have been these kind of inundations of ideas that rapidly are showing us that they are not true because they're doing whatever the fuck they want to do. So Mercury coming into Sagittarius, the opposing coming as an opposition coming off. Who and what do you believe in and why? Right? Who and what do you believe in and why? So as that is opposing and as that opposition occurs and everything's happening at Jupiter, later this week, once Halloween hits, February the 31st into November 1st, we get Venus making her way further into Libra, the sign she likes to be in, but she is going to start to oppose Chiron and Aries, and then those both at 24 degrees are then going to square Jupiter. So Jupiter is doing some work, y'all. Jupiter is doing some work on us. As we have this grand trine that is asking us to dream and expand and understand the kind of essence and care, and that care is going to come through our emotions, y'all. You're going to feel this. There are feelings everywhere. Scorpio is depths of feelings. Pisces is the collective feelings, and then Cancer brings that shit to the shore, right? We got to bring up and believe and have sitting at the table our emotions, our care, our body. Our body has to be present right now, whether you like it or not, because there is a tension going on, the tension between what we need for that care and the relationships and structures of justice that are being presented to us and what we are being asked to compromise for that power structure that is not giving us, again, the care it says it is. Remember, Jupiter rules structure, y'all. It rules law. It rules the structures of law. Saturn is also structured, but that's governmental. That's going to be the bones of things, the institutions. But those institutions have ways in which it then articulates, right, and moves and operates. So again, parents of the zodiac, Saturn lays the ground, Jupiter gives the kind of ideology around it. If that ideology that we have all been beholden to by this state is not actually working for us because it's antagonistic, literally antagonistic to us, right, to the ways that we need to move and operate, well, then we're being asked to revert back and go back to the structures that allow us to see and be with one another. This again goes back to the family. And family and community are always in a conversation because how we understand family will then dictate how we understand and shape community and vice versa. And so right now we're all going through this kind of deep interrogation, but deep facing of wombs. Okay. This is not easy energy, y'all. How many of us realize that we are walking around and leading our life through triggers, through wombs, through a wounding of the self? And how that shows up in our relationships. And it's not just romantic. It truly is not just romantic. A lot of this is family relationships. I see Grace energy, but whipping my ass. Same, right? Family relationships, friendships, even business relationships, right? Something I talked about last week that I want to get more into is this idea of business and relationships and commerce and economies and care and all of that. And something that I'm realizing really heavily about me is that I don't want to work with people intimately if I don't care for you, I don't trust you, and I don't consider you part of my family in one way, shape, or form. Now, people are always saying, again, don't mix business and pleasure, but the non mixing of business and pleasure is what keeps us exploiting one another. Keep seeing transactions as something in which I can take from you, but don't feel beholden to also giving back. That is not good business. That logic, the logic that we are fed through these kind of individual capitalism is really also breaking right now because the shit doesn't make any sense. And I think that's what we're also seeing too. This is the Uranus retrograde in Gemini coming back into Taurus. We are going to have to collectively really bulldoze our knowledge and knowing and our belief systems around our relationships. Gemini is the twin, right? It is the things that we are mirror and see with one another that we're going to have to face. Air masculine, right? This idea that it's all about seeing other people as just dollar signs, as just things to be exploited from. What has it gotten us? What has it gotten us as a society? Does it really allow us then, if we don't see each other as fully human? So that means that if I'm having an interaction with you, even if it's an online transaction, right? If I'm not involving some kind of care because I want you to come back, I want some loyalty, especially if I'm working for myself, but I only see you as a site of exploitation, that is going to show up eventually in the actual transaction process itself, in the exchange. The product may come late, the product may come half-assed, it may be this kind of weird interaction, right? Whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that does not allow us to have sustainable interactions and sustainable relationships. And because we get taught this idea of relationships, y'all, through this very top-down patriarchal heteronormative lens. And that's just not a bunch of words thrown together. So what does that mean in actuality and in practice? This means that we are taught to try to have to always be dominant in a relationship. We are taught that relationships are ones that are we're supposed to get something out of and may not have to contribute to, depending upon how our identity is formed. Right. But again, how does that work for us? Does that work for us? And what are different ways that we can be in relation to each other? A transaction does not have to be long standing, neither does a relationship, right? But then we're taught relationships to be this thing again, because it's through a romantic lens, usually, that you're out here trying to get your one person, right? That one person that needs to become your everything. And then y'all move into a house and you're supposed to have these kids, right? But the state only likes your kid when it's in the womb. The minute it comes out of that womb, it's up, fuck you, fuck us, fuck everybody else. That was your responsibility to take care of it. And so that child then is raised to be able to come into a society to do the same thing that you had to endure. How do we stop that cycle, y'all? Because that cycle is cycling us into authoritarianism over and over and over again. It's cycling us into giving up our authority to other people who have no business holding it, who don't have the care for it. So this is where the dreaming comes in, because even as we are trying to radically move beyond what is, we can so much fall victim to what already has been, that even in our dreams, in our dreamscapes, the structures, see, Jupiter here is loud in the square and in the trine. The structures can just fool us into remaking it in a different font. That's something I thought a lot about this past weekend. Yesterday, what is no Friday night? Friday night, I went up to, so I live in the South Side Chicago and South Shore, and there's a lot of interesting and cool projects going on here. And one of them is called the Land School that just opened literally around the block from me, and it's part of the Rebuild Foundation that Theaster Gates, who is a well-known artist and cultural worker, runs. And so he was in conversation with New Gates, I believe. I think I mispronounced that man's name. He was in a conversation at the Land School this Friday night, in which he was just talking about the impetus for the Land School, his visions and dreams for the future, and what it means to kind of steward land by getting assets and resources that are community focused and community driven. Because he also bought a old bank the Stony Island Art Bank, that's off of Stony Island here. It's a beautiful space that has various archives in it, performances. I've seen a few DJs there. Celeste Alexander had a whole Butterflies program in which she was training up and coming and new women DJs, the art of DJing and the like. So there's all kinds of things going on there. There's a Kenwood Gardens, in which over the summertime, there's all kinds of community kind of Sunday services. There's a lot of house music, a lot of bringing folks together and working again with the land and with the community. And so the land school is an old school itself, an old elementary school that the last 10 years that they have remade and remixed. And it's really cool. It's a really cool space for a community to come into. And so they were talking at the Esther. What's the point of this, y'all? Talking to the Esther, and it was really about this idea of futures being centered and this idea of conjuring something into existence. And Theaster was talking about how when he was thinking about buying one of the buildings or trying to acquire one of the buildings at the Kenwood Gardens, he would go every day in this kind of ritual, and he would just literally run around the building, this ComEd building, run around the garden in the building. He's not a runner. He's like, I'm not a runner, but here I am getting up running every day. And it was this kind of devotion to the dream he had and to the energy and intuition of coming into the space that he would kept seeing and thinking about, how can I get this building, this ComEd building that's just here so that it can be part of this kind of larger project. And then from there, he talked about how he ended up having a conversation with former Mayor Rahm Emanuel and then former Mayor Daley. And from those two conversations, just talking about his dream, he ended up getting a call from the director or the head of ComEd in the city who said that they would remediate the building and it would be his in 3 months' time. And everyone was like, the audience is like, oh, well, wow, blah, blah, blah. And it was really a testament to this idea of ritual and conjure, right? Picking a bone and sticking with that dream and coming into it. And so the whole point of me talking about this is that when he was asked more questions about this, he was pulling back out and he was saying, what does it look like for us to believe in the block, right? If we center the block, if we think of the block as an extension of self and family and community, then what would we see is viable and feasible in our blocks, in our local environments, right? Many times folks think about the South Side as a one-off, as a place that poor Black folks are that needs to be kind of either gentrified or forgotten. But that is so far from the truth. The South Side is a space, and it's a place, has been and will continue to be a place of not just organizing, but truly of community in different ways, of folks who have been here for decades, who do know each other, people who are trying to buy up their block so that when homes, even on my block, when homes come up, folks on the block try to acquire that property, even if they have to sit on it for years or decades, so that we ensure that the block itself is one that is with and for community, not just investors from the north side or outside of here who are going to come in and buy and sit on shit as they're waiting for the property values to increase. And one of the big things here being the Obama Center that's literally up the street. That is why we had a lot of community members in the aldermen's offices and in the city pushing for and now have won the ability to ensure that new houses that are coming up, new buildings coming up, and also the ones that are already here do not all rise in property value, and so that the property value goes up and rent goes up, because majority of the community here are older Black folks who are on fixed incomes. So taking care of the block, taking care of the community meant that even as folks are seeing the value for commodification of it, right, which is gentrification, that the community understands that the block is important for us, for family, for care. And so I thought the conversation is interesting and really beautiful, right? And when we think about the block, your block is an extension of self, family, and community. And so this really is the essence of conjure, right? That's the essence of hoodoo itself. But beyond just that practice, it's the essence of conjure and understanding and believing your reality, believing the reality we are in, understanding the structures that we are a part of, and then strategizing from there. Well, then it gets you to do things differently, right? It gets you to understand where you are currently, where your resources lie, and how you get those resources and remix and remake take them for larger communities. And so for Theaster, he had the ability and they have the access to resources to actually purchase and acquire assets that, as they're still figuring out how to engage them with the community, they are at least part of the community and have this kind of idea of where it's going next. Now, what's really interesting about this, though, is that it was so easy, though, to slip into current structural thinking because as he was talking, he talked about this idea of building a new nation, right? Taking back, remixing, taking back the block so that we can nation build differently, and this idea of building new nations and the nation itself as this kind of structure that he was operating from. And this is what got me thinking. But that's part of the problem. We're having this beautiful imagination, this beautiful idea of taking back the block, of engaging with the block, but we're doing so through a structure that has only shown us through space and time to always replicate destruction, replicate exploitation. The nation as we understand it, whether it be the Western nation state, through these colonial projects, even before then, the nation through the ways nation making and nation building have been done, mainly through monarchical ways, none of that shit works. Not long term, right? The idea of nation and nation building and using the nation as a template for us to dream and conjure gets us right back into structures that need to be broken again, whether it be 200 years time, 300 years time, or just now even a decade's time, right? So when we talk about dreaming right now, y'all, and Jupiter being leading right now, I want us to think outside the box. Think outside the structure. Think outside the structures that we know, because the nation state, as it has shown us through space and time, will always end up leading us into some type of authoritarian rule. Will lead us into needing that charismatic leader, that leader whose charisma ends up retarding itself. And when I say retard, I mean that in the scientific mechanism, in this kind of it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, that Xeroxing, right? That gets us into these present moments of really shallowness that, in order for to maintain, then has to use dominance. So when we're thinking about this week and thinking about structures, thinking about ritual, thinking about beliefs, thinking about practices, I want you to kind of go into your own rituals. Is what I recommend. What are the rituals that you need to invoke, that you need to re-examine, that you need to bring into the mundane, that will allow you to make the space so that you can sit with the emotions that are coming up, sit with the kind of harshness of the reality, and realizing that, yes, you're going to have to strategize, you, me, we, all together, individually and collectively, a different way of engagement and working with our emotions, working with our wilds. Because if you're not angry right now, if you're not pissed off right now, if you're not scared right now, if you're not all of these kind of big emotions that we are taught to suppress, that we are taught are quote unquote bad, especially if you occupy a body that is feminized in this society, because emotions are feminized, therefore they are demonized. Ah, demons coming up again. Lilith being the demon, but is she really a demon if she just feels and believes her motherfucking feelings, right? Is that really a demon, or is that doing the Lord's work? Who is Lord and who is demon? How is that being defined? I'm talking about belief systems, y'all. What do you believe in and why? And how are those beliefs rooted in either new futures, or are those beliefs rooted in getting you inadvertently to reproduce what already is, just in a different font? I really enjoyed the conversation that they had, and also was a little bit frustrated with the conversation. That's not a bad thing. I find that frustration for me is an emotion that's trying to get me to get more curious, to explore. And so I also say that for you all, get curious with your irritation and frustration and anger, especially if those are emotions that tend to be prominent for you. Okay, get curious with it. I've had to get very curious with my irritation because it can get really strong, very strong. And I had to get curious instead of judging it, because that is something that I have been taught to do, to judge my frustration, to judge my anger, to judge my irritation, because it was a way that I learned to discipline myself. Oh, Nicole, you're doing too much. Oh, that's kind of elitist, Nicole. Oh, don't be like that. And every time I did that, y'all, Every time I did that and kind of dismissed in a way my irritation, that shit would show its ass and show me that I wasn't necessarily wrong. It's not about being right all the time, but it's also realizing when you ain't wrong. You see what I mean, y'all? You ain't got to be right, but you sure as fuck ain't wrong. And that irritation can help you understand that. And so, irritation and is what was coming up for me when I was listening to the conversation because I felt he wasn't being pushed, right? Cultural workers need to be pushed. That is how they work the culture. That is how they bring down the energies of creativity, that strong Neptunian energy that can be transmuted and warped, that Plutonian energy that can be worked to kind of bend will, that Uranus energy that allows new genius to come through because it breaks through the structures and rebels against what we are told is actually truth and actually culture to begin with, right? We cultural workers need to be pushed. And in that conversation, I was frustrated because he was giving us all these nuggets and showing us his process and dreams, but then it was stopping at the idea of the nation, the block, and the idea of culture and the idea of creating, bringing it back and remixing and remaking and working in the structure. He talked about having to be a 501c3, right, as a way to be able to acquire the assets and understanding the structures you are in to work those structures for the block's good. That's great. And then what happens when we understand that those structures, those 501c3 entities that we all have to engage with in order to access assets is also meant to discipline organizations and institutions and these beautiful cultural constructs to eventually bend its will back to the state, right? We have to start to keep these conversations and push them more and ask ourselves then if we understand the structures we're in, if we understand that the ways that we even have access to taking back the block, being able to remake family and structure, remake the idea of relationships and economies. But as we're still beholden to the infrastructure as it is, again, thinking about it as the 501c3 in the United States context, right? Then how do we ensure that the strategies we are using, the conjures we are conjuring, the dreams we are dreaming individually and collectively also recognize that we are in a dirty ass house? We are in a dirty ass structure that requires us to understand that we will have to get dirty in one way, shape, or form. Because if not, then we will get subsumed under those structures and end up replicating them in another way. And so this is about cleansing and protecting. And it was interesting because the Astro talked about that. He was like, this is all dirty shit. Don't think you're going to be getting somebody the state's money in some way, shape, or form and not be dirty yourself. Right? We talk about washing money, and we have to understand that when you're washing dirty ass money, you will get dirt on that. You will get dirty in some way. There was a way that film will sit on you. So again, what is your grounding practice? What are your cleansing and protection practices? This is ritual. This is ritualization. This is what we need to do in the everyday to ensure that we are grounded, that we are located in our presence in the present day, so that as we are navigating these terrains, right, that we understand that we go in, we take what we need, and coming out, we need to have those rituals. And one of those rituals, besides just washing yourself and washing your ass and washing your house, is ensuring that you have other people who can remind you of what you are, who you are, and what you're doing in these spaces. So, this again, going back to care, going back to community and how we are constituting it and the beliefs we have around it, and what happens if we can rethink the idea of relationships not just being something we take from, not just being a transaction that is extractive, but understanding that the more care we bring into all of our relationships, including our business ones, right? Including the transactional ones that we are needed for our everyday, if that can also have care in it, then what is the longevity that we can have to build the structures and societies we say we want? So Venus squaring Jupiter and opposing Chiron this week at the end of this week, and it will have this energy until next week, until Venus makes her way into Scorpio. We are going to have to kind of face the ways that we show up in all of our relationships and how that does impact our sense of justice and how the economies that we engage with, right, have to then be rethought, because if we don't bring care into the ways in which we exchange and make money, then we ourselves will be part of the exploitation that we say that we don't want to have. And that's what they want, y'all. The state needs us to buy into its constructs of family, of care, of empathy, of our emotions, of our memories, and then how that constructs our stories. This is all memory. Do we remember the times? Do we remember the times in all of its iterations? And then whose side do we believe in that remembering? So Jupiter is going to be bringing up memories this week. Okay, the trine and the square. So there may be these emotions that come up via, you might be out or engaging with something or someone, and then a memory comes in. A memory comes up and it's sitting there and you're engaging with it. And as that memory comes up, you're probably feeling something, because memory invokes feelings. This is what I would recommend you do if this is coming up for you. Okay, observe that memory from the present. Observe the memory from the present. Get present and get curious. So if you're having a memory coming up from, say, childhood, and I'm saying childhood because Cancer also rules childhood. All right, it's the mother, it's mothering. Shit, you might actually have memories coming up of your mother, of mothering itself, of maternity and maternalhood. That could be it too. All kinds of ways it shows up. But if that memory comes up, y'all, I want you to take a step back and I want you to observe it from the present through a lens of curiosity. What do you see now? What do you see now, knowing what you know in the present day, that invoke that memory that is asking you to re-examine it, to re-observe it? What do you see? What do you feel? What do you taste? What do you smell? Right? Get all the senses going. There's more than 5, but you can use the main 5 ones, okay? And in doing that, then how does that then allow you to re-understand that time, that past, that memory that you can then use in the present day to strategize what it is you really want, need, and desire? Okay. Memories come up for a reason, because we have to tell stories, new stories. And when we don't understand how to tell the stories of our own lives, then retelling a collective story can get hard. So, Jupiter coming up in the sign of Cancer, which is going to be invoking memory, invoking story, invoking emotion, invoking our intuition, right along with us having to re examine the structures and the philosophies and the ideologies and the cosmologies around family and care and nurturing and all of that, right? Those memories are needed so that we can start to retell the stories of what we need the care for us, so that we can then rethink the structures that are needed to ensure that that care can be had. Does that make sense, y'all? And so in this moment, this is again about the dreams. What dreams do you have of the families that would provide the care for you and one another? What are the dreams of what it would look like to center the block? Center the block as a way to center the self, center family, center community, center love. This is all about love. And I talk about love a lot. This is all about love, y'all. It's all about love, but not bell hooks love. We need to move beyond just using 1 or 2 sites of understanding about love. I mean, no disrespect to Bell, but it moves beyond just these kind of constructed understandings of it. What does love mean to you? What does love look like, mean like, feel like, smell like, touch like, taste like? Right? What is that? And how does that become a foundation of understanding structures and economies of care for society? So this is about difference once again. Jupiter expands things, y'all. Jupiter is, again, the good time dad, the one that might drink a little bit too much, smoke a little bit too much, laugh a little bit too loud, right? Because it wants to experience life. This is about experiencing life. Remember, it rules Sag and Pisces, experiencing, being the hoe of life, and then Pisces doing it collectively, right? Pisces can be a hoe energy too. And I don't mean just sexually, I mean exploring, right? Exploration, creativity with the body, with the mind, with the spirit. So, how do we allow ourselves to become curious again, especially in times of chaos in which everything feels tight, everything feels pressing, everything feels both relevant but also not relevant at the same time? Well, this is where we got to find our feet. And you find your feet in these Piscean waters by coming back into the body. You have to come back into the body, y'all. Cancer ruling the body in another way because it's ruled by the moon, and the moon is our body. It's the emotional body, the physical body that pairs with the sun to create you. So then, what do you want to create and why? And what happens when we allow those tensions to come up, when we allow the wild to come out, so that we can then create the space, the breath, the ability to dream of something different, something new. And so this is really about imaginations that connect us to other sides, other realms, other ways of being. And in that construction, y'all, in that imagination, do you dare to dream the dreams that may feel as if they can never come true? This is about possibility making. This is about expanding the mind, expanding the dreams, expanding the ability to move beyond the structures given to us. But we can only do that once we come into the reality that we are in. Again, this is trining Saturn, and Saturn is giving us support, telling us that we have the ability to remake things for ourselves. Okay? Because we're seeing what happens when belief hits reality, right? When people's beliefs hit their reality and the shit don't match. Because right now we're getting a lot of kind of news reports in the US in particular talking about the resistance reaches Trump counties, right? And so you got all these news reporters talking about how folks who are in deep, heavy red and MAGA states are now protesting against Trump. And so the resistance is now reaching Trump property, or Trump land, I should say. And it's kind of a misnomer because there always was resistance in these very red states. It's just there's not a very loud about it. But now reality is meeting belief systems, right? The belief in a man who sold you a bill of goods, a bill of lies, a bunch of bullshit. He's a con man and he's good at what he does. And he understands that in order to con folks, he's got to touch upon what people are most invested in. And this is the harsh reality for all of us we are seeing in the United States, but honestly, also in many parts of the world, quite frankly, we are seeing just how much folks are invested in their hatred of others. We are. We're seeing just how much folks are invested in the hatred of others as a way to understand their sense of self. And the shit don't fucking work. The shit don't work. You might get a quick ass fix, but long term, it's going to come for your ass too. And that's what we're seeing right now. Racism sounds cute and good. The idea that you are superior to somebody else based on some kind of superficial traits or markers that you were told somehow make you superior. That is cute when the economy is good. That is cute when the power structure has maintained itself at least to the ability to weaponize its violence and enact its stories upon everybody else to make the world feel as if it is the bastion of not just freedom but also of coming up and bootstrapping yourself. When the story and the lie have some validity, then that shit will then make sense until the floor cracks and you realize that that story itself was always a facade, always something that needed you to buy into so that you bought into your hatred that was facilitated by the state to begin with to get you to be what? A good worker. And when the work is good, when the money is flowing, then you buy into these illogics, even as you constantly see folks who look like you won't fuck with you because you still don't have the criteria they deem to be fitting, right? Because you are still also seen as a worker and a commodity for them. When all of the shit breaks, right? When all of the facades, when the stories you have been told have been had to dry out. Remember, Neptune dried its ass out in Aries, and it's going to be drying out next year for 14 years. So the stories that people have bought into the last 14 years in particular, but really the last 250 years, because Pluto and Aquarius, we have this Pluto return, right? The collectives have been returned to the origin of the story that didn't make any fucking sense. We are going to see the ways that belief and reality are colliding, and folks are going to lose their minds. They already have, but we're going to see it more, y'all. Why? Because then now you are having to feel. We are going to see in real time how well and how not well people engage with their feelings, engage with their emotions, engage with reality as realities collide. Time is not linear or progressive, as I said before. And Saturn is really going to show us this shit as she has made her way back into Pisces, but coming back in for air next year. We are going to see the ways that time was never linear, that we are all operating in different timelines at the same time, and that when these timelines collide, there are ways that those who deem themselves as somehow above or not impacted by this are going to have to take some responsibility for their illusions and delusions. And when I say that, this does not mean that then they're going to have, this is this long kind of chastising. It's about you're going to have to take responsibility. You're going to take responsibility. And I don't give a damn if people want to get in their feelings about that and say, oh, we can't be mean. It's not about being mean. It's about growing the fuck up. You got to take responsibility for the bullshit that you bought into and digested and believed was to be true because it made you feel good for a minute because you felt you were superior to somebody else. The mirror is going to be turned around, y'all. The mirror is going to be turned around for all of us. We have all digested in one way, shape, or form the project that told us that it wouldn't come from us in one way, another way, shape, or form. And now that again, reality is meeting belief systems, we are going to have a crisis of faith. It's already starting, but it's going to get more. So in the crisis of faith, y'all, we have been here before in different ways. Do we learn from the past? Can we learn from the past instead of just saying we've been here before so we can do it again? That is not true. That is not true. We have been here before. And because we've been here before and the state has done what it needs to do to kind of remove us from there, it also removed many of the ways that when we were here before, we had strategies to fight back against it. And one of the biggest ways the state has ensured that we are not as good at organizing and coming together and being able to kind of push back against this encroaching authoritarian state as we have done before is because they came from the foundations of what they understood to be what allowed us to make the inroads we did 50 years ago. They came for the fucking family. They came for the family. They came for community. So again, Jupiter is making this really loud right now that you got to go back to the foundations if you actually want to make new structures, because the structures of society knew exactly what it needed to do to break our ability to organize and have long-term sustainable kind of networks. It broke up the family via breaking up the community. And so, again, talked about this before. You got a crack epidemic. You got AIDS. You've got eminent domain. You've got no child left behind. All of these things colliding and plenty of other things that then led to the suburbanization of a lot of locations. It led to the breakup of ideas of traditions and structures and traditions. Not always great, y'all, but there was ways that communities, even in times of harshness and lack of resources, were able to figure out ways to do this thing called mutual aid. They call them rent parties, right? There was different bake sales. There were folks taking care of each other because we lived in the same vicinity. You lived in the same community. So there was economies that were underground that were operating that allowed folks to be able to survive and do a little bit of thriving as needed. With all of those things broken up and everyone going into enclaves alongside the rise of rugged individualism, pop psychology has also done a whole ass number on us all. This idea, I don't know nobody, nothing, protect your peace, right? If they could, they would. Child, this is regurgitated shit. It's regurgitation of getting you to buy into the idea that you don't need anybody. You don't need anybody to do it, right? Protecting your peace means that you ain't got to show up for nobody, right? All of those things might sound good until you live the aftermath of that. When we don't know how to open up, when we don't know how to connect, when we can't hold our own emotions, therefore can't hold others, right? And all of that peace is really nothing more than a scarcity and a fear of actually being seen. We are afraid to be seen while also wanting to be seen in these kind of video screens and social media, right? The idea of the shock jock, the idea of virality, of being of just putting yourself out there authentically. But the minute you are authentic, people then chastise you because you're not performing a script. All of this shit is coming up to face us. We're being asked, does this make sense? Does it make sense? What piece are you protecting if you ain't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of because you can't afford the window or the pot? Right? Is that peace or is that more anxiety? Anxiety, right? Like literally, what are we doing here, y'all? Systems are breaking. Belief systems have to be bent because we're realizing that the essence of what it means to have a thriving society, to having this idea of functioning societies requires the essence of the thing that we are told, have been told for so long to move against. It's empathy. It's the emotions, it's care. Right? To be caring is not soft. It's actually a very strong thing to do, to understand that you, the self, can only be thriving if others around you are thriving, if they also are fed. When we're going to see real quick, if they don't fucking bring these SNAP benefits back, remember first, in the US, we are going to see very quickly just how much it is needed to ensure people are fed. If people are hungry, a whole lot of other things unravel. So then what does it mean to actually live? Are we living if we can't even feed ourselves? If we can't feed one another? Are we living? Is this life, y'all? Or are we walking dead? And who the fuck wants to be Walking Dead right now? We don't seen the imaginations of the Walking Dead and all them shows, right? And even then, that goes back to the imagination and dreaming, y'all. All of the futures that we have been shown in the public, right? The kind of dominant ones always have these violent kind of dystopian futures in which society collapses and then people turn into absolute barbarians and cannibals and vicious in nature. Whose imagination is that? And how viable is it? Like, how viable is that? This idea that the minute society collapses means we're going to go into straight violent anarchy is nothing more than the wet dream of folks who have only sat in their violent imaginations. But that is not the reality. Because in actuality, the ability to maintain that kind of violence comes at a cost, right? To be that violent requires energy. And if everything is collapsing, you're trying to feed yourself, you're trying to clothe yourself, right? After the initial chaos, there is a way that settling down will require understandings of what it means to provide care for each other if we're if we're going to actually survive. And so if we understand that and believe that now and see the ways that if we're talking about this idea of resistance meets Trump country, again, this is reality hitting people's belief systems. So do you believe your reality? And if you do, what are the ways that will lead you into different action? Well, when you believe your reality, you'll be in your body until your body comes on. Virgo South Node, Pisces North Node, bringing the head of the dragon and the tail of the dragon together. This is asking us to open up and turn our body's logic on, our technologies on, so that we can move collectively differently. And in that moving collectively differently, it's going to require us restructuring. Jen, Jupiter is the apex in Cancer, restructuring our relationship to our memories, our stories, which would then help us restructure our relationships to family, to nurturing, to care, to the home. So, who and what is home, y'all? Who and what is home right now? And how do we remake the home? Right? This again, an idea of the rugged individual and that you got to move out, especially in the West, especially in the US. So I'm getting real US here with this. This idea of kicking your kids out at 18, of getting them prepared for the real world. Reality is what we make it. Reality is what we make it, right? I don't want to kick my kid out at 18 because I was told that that is what a grown-up is when I know good and goddamn well you have just hit your first nodal return. You are barely figured out how to wipe your own ass, and you are trying to figure out what even your body is, because the body at that time at 18, 19 years old is going through its own things, right? You might get a last growth spurt. You're still trying to figure out how to walk and not fall down. I'm not even trying to be facetious here. Like, if any of y'all have had growth spurts later on in life, you know that it can feel like a puppy finally getting its legs. And we're expecting an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old to get out here, get a job, get a house, do all of these things. Like, we are setting ourselves up for failure, especially when we do not value kids to begin with. So growing up from birth to 18, we are also taught to teach our kids to only obey. So you can only obey, don't talk back, don't have your own opinions, right? Don't work with your emotions. Teenagers, right? That is a time in which you are just trying to figure out what the fuck this thing called the body is. You're getting these feelings, these emotions. You are again growing. Things are changing, right? Things are coming on, things are coming off. So, but then don't talk about it, don't engage with it, don't express yourself. But then you turn 18. Oh, now you're an adult. So you go from a child that is property to now you're an adult, but you have not been taught how to engage with your humanity. This is why we got a bunch of fucking adults who are older in age but have no wisdom and sitting around here just doing these kind of very infantilized reactions because they've never actually allowed to have been kids. So when you don't allow yourself to be a kid, when society does not allow us to be children and childlike, we have no idea how to work with our emotions, have no idea how to work with our curiosity, don't know how to fucking play. So then there's a disassociation that happens. This is where the booze and the liquor and the drugs come in, right? As a way to try to maintain. And so then we get these deregulated societies and people who think that they are grounded, but in actuality are playing out fucking childhood wombs. You know what I mean? And then look at where we are now. Look at where we are now in the US. This is exactly who's leading this goddamn nation. A fucking immature bunch of men who don't know how to work with their emotions, probably ain't wiped their own ass and God knows how long. I can smell folks through the damn screen at this point, right? When you see these so-called leaders talking at us instead of to and with us. So we are seeing the implications of what happens when we do not allow people to be kids first. The foundation of families, besides the guardians, are the kids themselves, the next generation. So, what happens if we allow our kids to be kids? What happens if we allow our kids to be kids, which means we allow them to fully be and express themselves, right? And our jobs as whether the parents or folks who are supposed adults in society, right? Our job is to help steward them, is to help facilitate their growing up and into their own humanity. What would that look like as a foundation? What would it look like? Right? What the fuck would that look like? Well, one thing I think would look like is that we know that we need to feed our kids, right? SNAP benefits are for people who need help and support. And some of the most vulnerable in society are the elderly, are the folks who are disabled, and our kids. The most vulnerable, right? Outside of demographics, you can put upon that. And in reality, it really is kids. Because again, our human babies need care, need support, need safety. That is the foundation. So if you grew up in a time in which you were told that your kid should cry it out as a way to care, okay? If that is how you were taught from society to care for your kid, to let them cry it out, to let them figure it out as a baby, because you were also taught that babies are manipulative and selfish. And so they're crying for your attention. No shit, they're crying for your attention. They need fucking food or care or comfort or have their diaper changed. And that is how they are talking. They are talking with the first mind, which is the stomach, which is the emotions. But if we are taught that that is wrong, as a baby that needs that for survival, then how the hell do you think that that translates as we can grow older and how we see ourselves and one another? But then that doesn't mean that the emotions aren't there. It doesn't mean that they don't come the fuck up because your body is still here, the sentient being, right? So then we bear the brunt of unemotionally regulated humans that end up taking leadership positions many times because we're taught leadership through this kind of dominant, top down, do as I say, not what as I do kind of mentality. Again, what does that replicate? The nuclear family that don't really nuclearize a goddamn thing, but trauma, right? And over and over again, we see that then replicated in our businesses, our business relationships, our friendships. So you understand why I'm saying that relationships overall, with Venus opposing Chiron and going up into Jupiter, we are having to reevaluate that wounding of family and care and our emotions because that is translated and transmuted into how we have our economies. how we regulate and deregulate things, what we see and what we are okay commodifying, how we are okay treating each other in our transactions. Do you see what I mean? I can have a one-off transaction with you. That does not mean that that one-off transaction, I'm going to fucking exploit you, and don't exploit me, because I never know 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, shit, maybe my kids will engage with your kids, and that story lays the foundation of the next transaction we have with each other. Do you see how these things are related, y'all? You see how they're related? So then we go into these businesses, we go into these corporations, we go into these offices, we go into these careers that we are told that is what we are here for, to work. We are told we are here to work, to pay fucking bills for other people, and that is our purpose in life. So then we go into these spaces with unregulated emotions and adults, and you yourself probably are unregulated too. And then we are having conversations in which we don't even know what the fuck we're really talking about, because we are dealing with each other's childhood wounds. You know what I mean? We dealing with a bunch of wounded ass adults who ain't never been kids, who just want to be seen, who just want to be heard, who just want to be cared for. And you know what? Yes, nothing is wrong with wanting to be seen, heard, and cared for. Nothing is wrong with that, y'all. But then how do we hold it, and how can we give it back? How do we reciprocate it? Right? Yes, it's about the right relationship with ourselves, one another, and the land we are from. Because if we can have a better relationship of care with one another in the transactions we have, even if they are one-off in a business location, right? And we can have a better relations with our emotions, with our family, with our friends, then how we care for the land will also be different. Because we understand then that the relationship we have with the environment we're in facilitates our ability to have better relationships with folks on our blocks and in our homes, because then everything is cared for. Do we see how things are interrelated, y'all? Uranus and Gemini going back into Taurus is going to make that shit loud. It's going to go one last time and saying, you thought this shit was safe and secure? You thought that this was stability and safety, baby? We're going to review. Do you believe, Uranus and Gemini, do you believe this shit right now? That's how I want to live. I want to create. I want to build new dreams with other people. I want people to realize that they can take their dreams and bring them into reality. But you got to be audacious enough to do it. You got to follow your wild. You got to bend the rules, because the rules have bent you. So why give your offering to a state that does not have the ability to hold you? Fuck all of that. Take your offering back. That's how I want to be eulogized. That's how I want to be eulogized. I want that altar to always have what I need and what I loved in this life, so that I got the fuel on the other side to be able to then be of service, to really be of service to my kin, who understand how to venerate, how to call down the dead that want to see their liberation, to want to see their head, their Ori lead. That's how I want to be venerated. Well, for me to do that, there's some vulnerability that I got to embody when I'm alive. Do you see what I'm saying, y'all? So then that means I have to acknowledge my wants, needs, and desires. I got to be okay letting the version of me die that I held on to so tightly, because that was a protection, that was a shield for so long, when I wasn't embodied and I was trying to perform these scripts put upon my body. Eldest daughter, right? Firstborn of her name, right? The one that was the first to go to college, the one that always figured it out because you had to figure it out, right? The one who was always able to make dollars out of cents, who was able to take on the kind of, charge for the collective, for the office, for the people. And that shit fucking killed me. Right? And again, many of y'all have the same story in different font. Picking up the service that was put upon your body and trying to be the good servant in a society that only knows economies through extraction and transactional exchange, that is about fucking you over to make a buck, because that is what we are taught to do in these family structures in one way, shape, or form. Do we see how these things collide and keep us confined in scripts that have us performing service to entities that will only take and never give back? We got to get vulnerable with ourselves. Do you like that? If you don't, if you really don't, if you put down the need to honor thy father and thy mother, as it was told to us, and understand that the father and mother is the sun and moon, which is you, which is you. So what does it mean to honor you as a way to honor the father and mother that came together, 1 + 1 to be 3, to make you? Well, then honoring the father and mother means honoring you. So what does it look like to honor you, to be devoted to you? To allow the you to come in, not in a superficial way. I'm not saying to do the kind of ways we have been taught devotion of the self through these kind of one-off self-care things. Now, care of the self is needed, and part of that is the body. You got to wash your ass, y'all, because being funky ain't going to actually allow anything to come in, because that is also a part of the cleansing and protecting, okay? I want to make that shit real clear. You got to wash your ass and wash your home, because that is part of the opening of the roads for your own clarity. But that is a vulnerability that has to also happen when it comes to this idea of opening up and caring for the self. What does the self need? What do you need? Can you center that as a way to figure out what the center actually is? And in doing that, that is how we figure out how to honor the self, so that we understand how to honor the dead, because then we're getting honest about who we are and what we need. So therefore we can get honest about what our spirits need. So therefore we're getting honest about what we need as a society, what we need as a family. And then that's what we would fucking defend. So how do you want to be honored when you die? How do you want to be honored when you die? And if you died tomorrow, would that, how you want to be honored, could people actually do it that way? Does anybody even know? Does anybody even know? Right? And who then needs to know? If no one knows, and then the people that you have on that kind of kinship charts, right? Family structure currently and chosen family, and you do that comparison. And then you go into and you ask yourself, how do I want to be honored when I'm dead? How do I want to be venerated? And then who knows how to do this? Have the conversation with yourself. Don't judge yourself. Have the conversation with yourself. Allow the emotions to come up, because that is you having your beliefs hit reality. And it collides in the body. And when you turn that body's logic on, when you turn that technology on, when you turn that Lilith, that wild on, that is the revolution not being televised, because there is no goddamn way you can't do something different. And that is the unknown. And that is why it is scary. That is why people tell you to go back to what is already known, but what is known is keeping us in these fucked up systems. So go into the unknown, go into the wild, go into the uncomfortability of that unknown fear, because that is where the revolution and the rebellion actually lie. Your body wants to do something different. Can you let it? And in doing that, can you find other bodies that can then do that different thing you call life together? That's one of the ways, not the only way, one of the ways that we can push back against this encroaching system that is here to denigrate and take more from us by ensuring that its construct of the family is solidified in law. That's why they came for Roe v. Wade. That's why they're coming for queer gay marriage. That's why they're coming for trans folks, because they want to make sure that the nuclear family is solidified in law, even though they're not going to be doing this. They fucking everything and everybody. Okay, this is why Tinder and Grindr get all lit up when the Republicans come to town in any kind of city they come to, right? Suppression of your desires that is then made to be deviant because you have made them deviant. And since you dictate what is normative and deviant in society, and you can't face yourself and your own attractions and your own wants, needs, and desires, you then make your deviance everyone's deviance, and therefore you are then demonizing all parts of society. Do we see what happens when you don't actually even acknowledge your own understandings of attraction and desire and needs as a human? You then demonize yourself, and when you can't face yourself, you make everybody else demonize that aspect of them because you perverted it. Therefore, you think it's a perversion of everybody else. Take back the authority, y'all, by taking back your body and what you desire, what you need, what you want, and how that will then show up in the everyday mundane, in the ways and structures of how we construct who and what we and where we fuck, who we fuck with, okay? Because that then will allow us to tap into that Lilith, tap into that Lilith and Scorpio that is right next to Mars as a strategy making for then how we reconstitute our collectives by taking the authority back and remaking and taking back time, because we understand that that is the foundation and structures of not only our belief systems, but also the foundations of the family, which is the foundations of society. And in doing so, we can remake the structures and systems and economies that then have put us in relationships, wrong relationships with ourselves and one another, so that we can then find our heads and then remake the structures that we say we want for futures that actually are humane, which means if we want humane structures, and Pluto is in the sign of the humanitarian, you have got to let go and die, have death come to the structures that are already here. And we have got to put to rest, put to bed the concept of the nuclear family, the heteronormative nuclear family that is not giving any kind of care, because in that construction of the family, children are property. Children are not human. And we need children to be human so that we can see our own humanity, so we can go back into our memories, y'all. When those memories come up from childhood, you can see your own child, your own inner child as a human. You got to see yourself as a human, y'all. You got to go back and talk to your own inner kid, especially if you were not given childhood. And I get too many clients that come to me who have never had a childhood, who really need to play and don't know how to play. We know how to disassociate. We don't know how to play. We don't know how to experiment. This is why in the Patreon, I call it a lab. We're experimenting. I've done shit. Some things have been great. Some things have not popped off. I'm like, well, that shit didn't work, but it's an experimentation. If I stop beating myself up and allow myself to play, I'm a fucking Leo as it is. Leo sun, right? The 10th house. It's the only thing I really do know how to do as a way to figure out what is sustainable, right? But then I got to create the structures that will give me the ability to be vulnerable and play. That's why I do things on the Patreon. This is why I'm having this show on the Patreon and taping it live here, but then only keeping the full thing up for patrons, putting part of it in the public, but keeping really a lot of it behind a paywall, because this is nurturing a space of experimentation and play. Because I want folks who are engaging with me in here, if y'all are coming and paying your money to me and investing in me, right, as I am pouring out into you, then I want you to have the space as well to experiment and play with me. We can play together. Right? I got plenty of room to play with, right? So, but that needs a container. It's okay to make containers right now, y'all. It's okay to not fully be out there, because we have seen also the illusions and the backlash of what happens when you do overexpose yourself in collectives, in societies that can't see themselves. So we're being fed this idea, be authentic, put yourself out there, just do it. But in actuality, we have seen the backlash of what happens when you are out there. Humans are messy. Humans are contradictory. We can't hold our own contradictions. How the fuck are we holding anybody else's? Especially when they present themselves in this quote unquote authentic way, but we don't even understand authenticity. So what does it mean, right, to come back into a different understanding of the collective, of humanitarianism? We got to become human again. So Pluto is taking us on that ride, and we take on that ride by, again, Neptune, rethinking these origin stories, taking the glamour off, thinking about how we do glamour magic differently. And what happens if we can glamour ourselves into new knowings, Uranus and Gemini, when it goes back into new knowings, new geniuses, new constructions and understandings of technologies that are not taking from us as the human, but actually aid us in understanding our humanity. Technology itself is not a problem. AI itself is not necessarily the problem. It's this promise of AI somehow making us a better human or more efficient. That doesn't make any sense if we have not been human to begin with. If we understand our technologies have not been efficient to begin with, every new technology that we are given that says we're going to be this great, expansive new human has done nothing but fail. Because it is a fantasy not rooted in the actuality that the first technology is the body. And if we don't even understand how to work with the first technology, all these so-called new innovation technologies that are meant to make us better as humans in one way, shape, or form will do nothing but show us just how non-human, how inhuman, how much we lack our knowledge of the technology that really can allow us to create these so-called efficient, but also more caring and more comforting societies. external technologies won't do that until we internally turn the one on for us. And this is exactly, to me, what a lot of these energies are for this week, but are continuing on from previous weeks and will continue to make themselves known. Okay, so this is the tense week, but it's also a kind of watershed week with this grand trine and the T square, water and fire, right? Water and fire, steam. So can we work with our emotions to create, right? To kind of cleanse the site, to cleanse our reality so we can see our realities and come into it and then enact the different types of relationships that we want to have. But the first relationship we're going to have is with the self. And then let that desire lead, y'all. What do you really want? What do you really want? And if you allow that vulnerability with yourself to come forward, and then you realize you need other people to help with that, because again, who's going to eulogize you? Who can really speak to and about you to others? And then who could you speak about, right? Flip it and reverse it. Who do you feel like, if you eulogize them, you could really get to the essence of them? Or would you just be talking about all the service they did for others, but not really talking about them? So it's a process, an exercise you can do the both and with. Because then we have to make sure that we're also being able, if we can show up for ourselves, then we got to show up for other people, right? Can we see other people outside of just the service they provide, right? The transaction that they give. Can we do that? And if we can, right, again, that allows us to remake this idea of kin, family, home, community. So what does it look like to center the block, right? Center the block as a way for us to then really remake and figure out what the rebellion looks like. It won't be televised because it does start with the self, starts with us, starts local. And in that locality, we can then get national. All right, y'all. Let me stop there. I went on and on and on today. Thanks for staying with me. So next week, we got a full week as well, astrologically. We get Mars going into Sag, right? And it's going to be opposing Uranus. We got a full moon in Taurus. We got Venus going into Scorpio. And then Uranus again goes back into Taurus as well. So it's boom, 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 boom. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to continue this story making. We're going to continue to dream. So again, I'm asking you to dream and remake the construct of the family and care by asking and getting clear with yourself about the care that you need. Get vulnerable with you. In order for you to get vulnerable with you, y'all, get vulnerable with your inner child. Get vulnerable with your inner kid, right? What does your inner kid want, need, and desire? What is it kind of knocking and asking to be seen? That's a way for vulnerability to happen with the self. And as in doing so, see how that influences your interactions with other people, but also your interactions with money as well. Okay, interactions with other people, yourself, and money. And in doing so, play with that, continue that story. We'll continue the story next week as we get this full moon in Taurus that's going to really reveal to us and make really bright, right, the ways that our material needs have and have not been met. Okay. Now, again, if you're interested in doing a one-on-one reading with me, my books are still open. I'm running my fall special to the end of this month. So by Friday, you can book for the following month. But at the end of the month, my fall special will end. And until then, you can get 35% off any 1 hour reading with me. Okay. As well as if you're interested in taking a seminar with me, tomorrow I am teaching my Understanding Your Spiritual Gifts with Astrology. I will have the show notes about that through Big Liz Conjure. And then next month in November, starting at November, that first Wednesday, November, for every Wednesday for the first 3, I will be teaching my Astrology 100 series through Big Liz Conjure as well. So you've been interested to learn the basics of astrology from an anthropologist who examines it through a Black queer lens, go ahead and join me there, okay? And then I will be having my next Queering Chaos conversation in Chicago, November 18th. Now, if you're on the Patreon, I will be posting long snippets of the conversation from the first one about queering spirit and spirituality. That'll be up on the Patreon once I get that back from Ja Media. And then I will be having some smaller clips for the public as well to kind of show what these conversations are bringing. The first one was fire. I really enjoyed it. J.T. Perry, I'll in the Patreon, y'all gonna hear this, but J.T. Perry gave this great part of the conversation where she was talking about hoodoo and our understanding of spirit and comparing that to kink and the kind of foundations of kink. And so foundations of kink and the foundations of spirit, she put those in a conversation and it was really fucking cool. So I don't want to mess up her words, but I will have that clip soon once I get those, once I get that footage back. And we're going to continue this conversation from spirit and spirituality, talking about family and community. Okay. And I think that is it, y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining me. I hope y'all have a blessed week. Okay. No problem, Dina. I'm glad y'all were still here. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscape so we can bring the future, say we want to bring into the present. Oh, and also Patreon, we'll be having a salon conversation on Wednesday. So if you want to learn more, go ahead and sign up for the Patreon. All right. Till next time. How can you live with the world on your shoulders? I said, how can you live with the world on your shoulders? You can't, so shake it off. It's time to dance.
Dance to the music, it really doesn't matter who's looking. 'Cause I've been working, and tonight I deserve it. The lights are flashing, and now I'm ready for action. So you can meet me on the floor, losing control.
It's time to get wild, feet on the floor, head held high. Feel that sweat down your back, releasing in the church of house music. Church of House Music.
How can you dance with the world on your shoulders? Get under the groove if you want to get over. How can you dance with the world on your shoulders? Get under the groove if you want to get over.
I call in my wild, the untamed that lies within me, just below the surface, scratching, clawing, roaring its way out. Reclaim what was stolen, the wild in all of us. So it's time to dance, releasing in the church of house music.